Well, the major ones are John Roddam Spencer Stanhope, who sculpts the cross for his daughter's tomb. And he sculpts his own tomb, which is in the other cemetery when this one was closed. He came to Florence because of his asthma and lived at the Villino Strozzi in Bella Squadra. And they just had the one daughter who died young.
Is that Mary?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And then William Holman Hunt and his wife, when they were first married, were on their way to Jerusalem, but there was a cholera epidemic, and they were in quarantine. They couldn't proceed on their journey.
Was the cholera epidemic here in Florence or in Jerusalem?
I think they were closing all of the ports because it was general in the Mediterranean area. He'd already been in Jerusalem, and they were trying to go back, and she was pregnant and died following the childbirth. They didn't know to wash their hands when they delivered babies in the Victorian period, so she died of fever. And we have the paintings of, let's see if I can find them.
Now, did Holman Hunt paint the scapegoat, do you know,
yes,
in his first trip or after she died, you know?
That's before, I think.
Okay.
And, let's see, we're getting there. This is his wife when she's ill and pregnant.
And that's Fanny Waugh.
That's Fanny.
My surname's Waugh.
Oh,
it is, yeah.
Yes. That's spelled W-A-U-G-H.
Exactly, yeah. So she must be some distant relative.
And then he remembered her.
Yeah.
And painted her following her death as Isabella with the pot of basil.
I think I just saw that in London at a Pre-Rafaelite exhibition.
And you see here the skeleton, the skull?
Yes.
It's premonition of her dying, and it's filled with these wonderful details that he creates, the inlays and so forth. It's also based on Boccaccio's story and Keats' poem. And he marries her sister to raise a child, because the child survives, and it's called Cyril Benoni. Benoni was the name of Rachel's child. She had died in the Bible from following childbirth, giving birth to Benjamin. He also paints, this wonderful painting he did of Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem, with all of the observations. And in that he's very like Lord Leighton, who also, when he built Leighton House, filled it with sort of the Orientalism, the love of Eastern art.
Was that in Holland Park?
I have not seen it. I would love to.
Yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
It's interesting because Elizabeth and Robert, when they came to Florence, and they were living in Casa Guidi, which Robert furnished. Sorry, I've got these in
no problem.
order. Robert furnished Casa Guidi with all of the sort of, Pre-Raphaelite Giotto paintings and so on and so forth, which he was able to buy in San Lorenzo Market, where he also bought the Old Yellow Book, which became his poem, where they're all narrating the story about the husband who murders his wife. And Robert commissioned this to be painted from a Greek painter, Giorgio Mignati, whose two children are buried here, because he found he couldn't photograph this adequately. When Elizabeth died, he wanted a memorial of it. But on the mantelpiece is a sketch by Dante Gabriel Rossetti.
It's one of these four?
One of these.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Of Dante Gabriel Rossetti reading Tennyson's Maud. And both Elizabeth and Robert were present. So you can see that the Pre-Raphaelite circle and the various Victorian poets were intermixed and playing off each other.
What about Hiram Powers? I don't know anything about him.
Hiram Powers is wonderful. He's Maverick American.
Oh, really?
and he's part Native American, and he's born in Vermont and lives in Ohio, and he's part of this whole movement against slavery. And he comes to Florence because of the Carrara marble and becomes professor at the Accademia di Belle Arti. Here he is. Normally this would be a paper hat he'd wear while he was sculpting. And this is his magnum opus. It's The Greek Slave.
Oh.
It's very Victorian, but it's also very beautiful.
It is exquisite. Mm-hmm. Where's that at?
He did several copies of it. There's a small one in the Smithsonian, a larger one in the Corcoran. There's one in Scotland. This was at the very centre of the Crystal Palace exhibition in 1851, and Queen Victoria and Prince Albert saw it. And before it went on exhibition, Elizabeth Barrett Browning had already written an anti-slavery sonnet to it, where she's speaking against her father's slavery. He owned slaves in Jamaica. And she's also speaking out against Russian serfdom. And she's borrowing from a Greek form where the Greek poets would create a poem for the statue to speak. And this is what she's done with this.
Oh, really? Does that have anything to do with Pygmalion or no?
That's right.
Galatea?
Exactly.
Does it?
Exactly, yes.
Well, and that's based on that myth or somehow?
Partly, yes.
Really?
Yes. The idea that, in Judeo-Christianity these became idols, which was why when Michelangelo sculpted the David against graven images, not even circumcised, it was really a shock. Because up until then you didn't have freestanding statues in the Christian world. The Gothic sculptures are all in niches as part of the architecture.
Is there any significance to that statue of David not being circumcised?
Well, it's such a slap in the face to
Judaism.
To Judeo-Christianity.
Is it?
Because even the way a cemetery was, the burying of the dead in the earth is Judeo-Christian. And then you see in this cemetery where they're all pretending to be Greek and Roman burials of ashes and of sarcophagi. But actually the bodies are still buried in the ground. Now we can bury ashes from cremations, but you certainly couldn't in the Victorian period.
Oh, especially in Florence.
Right. Although there was an Indian prince who died here in the 19th century.
Yeah, I've done a little article on him, yeah.
They had to burn him by the Arno River, and his tomb is in the Cascine.
And they had to do it at night?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had to bury in the Protestant cemetery in Rome. They had to bury them at night.
Now there is one really interesting grave here that has like 8 urns full of ashes in it.
Oh, that's the Vital family. Yes.
Was that late Victorian? Is that why they were allowed to do that?
They're placed there after the cemetery was closed in 1877. That family had bought that part of the cemetery. In fact, Charles Vital was the custodian of the cemetery. And so they continued to place urns there.
So, are there any other pre-Raphaelite connections to this graveyard?
Not really, that I can think of.
So there's Hunt and then Stanhope, and then Leighton was loosely associated with the Pre-Raphaelites, but not specifically one himself. Leighton,
yes, because he's an academic. Mm-hmm.
And was he a friend of Browning?
Yes, and especially he admired Elizabeth a lot. And let me show you. This is, he illustrates George Eliot's Romola. And this is where Romola finds that Tito has 2-timed her. and has another wife with a baby. And he illustrates Elizabeth's faun, the god Pan, for her poem Musical Instrument. And he's very sympathetic to her. And this is his own self-portrait, which is in the Uffizi.
Oh, is it?
He never married, but he was very sympathetic and understanding to women writers. And when he designed her tomb, he designed the harp, the Exodus harp, the Jewish one, with the broken slave shackle. We discovered that these drawings were for the tomb, and they didn't know this until I asked, and then they found it. But this is the Jewish one, this is the Greek one, and this is the Christian one, because she was fluent in Greek and Hebrew, and was also translating the Greek church fathers. And
was she also part African? Do you know?
Yes,
She
yes,
was, definitely,
yes.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. And he designed the tomb with her portrait. And Robert was also part black, and also, unlike Elizabeth, who admired Judaism and knew Hebrew, he was part Jewish. But he suppressed that information, and Elizabeth celebrated it. So what happened when Leighton designed this tomb with Elizabeth with her spaniel locks and her head down, was Robert went and changed the design to be something, had it changed, because it was a different sculptor. Leighton just did the drawing. And Giovinazzi changed it to be like a blonde-haired, blue-eyed, ideal figure of poetry.
That's the cameo you're speaking of? Or,
yes,
yeah.
It's the exact opposite.
It doesn't really look like her, does it?
No, and you cannot recognize the tomb as hers.
Right.
Because Robert has censored it. And it doesn't even have her name on it.
Now, do you think that was censoring, or was it just classicization kind of?
It's both.
Is it?
I feel, because she doesn't die of TB, she dies of an overdose that he administers.
Who?
Robert.
Really?
Yes. And he's jealous of her and very controlling, and doesn't allow her her money that she's earned. Even when she's dying, she's desperately unhappy because the black slave in the family, Treppy from Jamaica, had inherited money from the grandfather, Edward Barrett. And Treppy paid for the publication, when Elizabeth was 20, of her second work, Essay on Mind. Her father had published her poem on the Battle of Marathon. But it was Treppy, the slave, who paid for the publication of Elizabeth's second magnum opus. And Robert's friend, Count Cottrell, who's the one who did the changing of the tomb, he talked Treppy out of her inheritance to invest it, to speculate with it, and it was all lost, and Treppy went mad because she felt so betrayed by Elizabeth's husband. And Elizabeth's last letters, she's frantically asking her sisters to arrange for Treppy to have an income to replace what's lost. And Robert has forbidden Elizabeth to tell her brothers what's happened. So she can't ask her brothers, she can't use her own money. All she's allowed to do is to tell her sisters, because Robert censors her letters when she sends them out.
Does he actually have some sort of legal power over her, or is it just more of a codependent sort of power?
It's both. He did, before they married, sign a marriage settlement which protected her, but it's not observed during their marriage. And the money is pouring in, but for her poetry, not for his, because he's not writing very much during their marriage. And he becomes famous later. So, and this is The son becomes an artist, pen, and a sculptor. He studies under Roddam, and this is his portrait engraved later on of his father in his Oxford robes with the old yellow book in the story in which the husband murders the wife. And when I read that poem, it's really is a confession that, in a sense, because he confesses in the poem, he both has it and is disguised. It's like the Father Brown stories by Chesterton, where you put the most obvious clue very visibly in front of everybody.
In plain sight.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is sad.
Was there any kind of illicit relationship between Elizabeth Browning and the slave that you were mentioning?
Treppy.
Do you think? Treppy, yeah.
Treppy
any kind
was
of
an older woman.
friendship? Oh, okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm. But certainly a friendship, yes. Because that was the real link with their history on Jamaica.
Why did Elizabeth Barrett Browning prefer to live in Florence?
Most of these people are mixed race. Let's see if I can find it. Okay. Fanny Trollope, she's living in Florence because her husband is a debtor. Many people came here because of debt. Or Harriet Beecher Stowe, she's not here, but she's copying two other people who are here. Isa Blagden. She is part East Indian, part Jewish. She's the model, along with Fanny Trollope's daughter-in-law, Theodosia Trollope, who's also part Jewish, part East Indian, for Miriam in Hawthorne's Marble Fawn. Yeah. It's wonderful. It's about, well, Donatello is Browning, and it's a story of the artists in Florence and Rome, and it's just splendid. And a woman artist, a woman sculptor, and then this is Leighton, who he became Viceroy of India. Isa and Lytton are in love with each other. She saves his life, but he can't marry her because she's not English. And so he marries a proper English girl and goes off and becomes Viceroy of India. Here you see...
No, that's Penn right there, right?
That's Penn. And you can see that his mother is not very English. And this is painted across the street by Michele Gordigiani, his studio is there, who also paints Cavour. And Elizabeth dies a few days after Cavour dies, lamenting the Cavour's death and the loss of hope for the Risorgimento at that point. And
sorry, what's the Risorgimento?
So what I'm saying is a lot of the people came here because of problems in their background, racial situation where they met prejudice in England, or debt, and so on and so forth. They say Florence was this funny place for shady people. This is the harp of Exodus with the broken slave shackle which Leighton has placed, and which Giovinazzi has not censored because it's not visible. Okay, this is the Christian harp with the cross, and also he's got the olives for Italy, he's got the lily for Florence on the front, and the flowers of the British Isles, and the portrait which was altered is on that side. And then I think we have to go round this way, the Greek harp, which at first I thought was the masks of tragedy and comedy, but they didn't seem quite right, until I went to the Giardino Torrigiani and I saw the statue of the god Pan, whose face is distorted, one half that figure and the other half normal. And I realised that Leighton had seen that harp, that statue of Pan, and he had also done the illustration of the god Pan for Elizabeth's poetry. So in a disguised way, he has placed the god Pan on this tomb for Elizabeth. And the poem is critical of Robert, because she's describing Pan, who has raped, turned her into the panpipes that he plays. So he has exploited and killed the girl. Okay, this is the tomb of Fanny Holman Hunt, sculpted by Holman Hunt himself, with the lilies that are copying Leighton's lilies. This is later than his. And the quotations of the passages from the Bible also use one of the quotations that's in Elizabeth's sonnets from the Portuguese to Robert when she's courting him. And because the baby, the Fanny dies in childbirth, the dove carrying the olive branch, which reflects off this, is a very pregnant dove. And the tomb, the shape of the tomb is, also reflects the body of his wife. It's a very moving one. He sculpted it himself. It's not, he didn't pay a sculptor to do it. Love is strong as death, many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. And then, it is I, be not afraid. This is Christ on the Sea of Galilee in the storm. When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee, and through the floods they shall not overflow thee. All of these are biblical quotations. This one is also used by Elizabeth Barrett Browning in sonnets from the Portuguese, and they're all referring to water, which is like the waves upon which this ark is floating. Leighton had designed a portrait that was her. Francesco Giovanozzi and Count Cottrell arranged for it to be changed. Count Cottrell says that it's much better this way, with the hair swept up behind the ears and so on and so forth. And quite clearly this woman is blonde and blue-eyed, and not the Jamaican part slave Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And I think it's a great shame, because my visitors come up here, they only see EBB because Robert was to pay for the name and Leighton paid for the tomb, and they see no portrait of her. And the sadness is also that her nickname in her family was Ba, for both Robert and her brothers and sisters. The Ba is the Egyptian soul which cannot return to the tomb unless there is the portrait and the name. So what Robert has done is a second death. Vieri Torrigiani planted this white rose on this tomb because there had been a rose from the Torrigiani gardens planted there originally. We also know that the daughter of this woman did the sketch from the book by Champollion Rossellini, owned by the Marchese Torrigiani, of the winged globe that's on Arthur Hugh Clough's tomb. She was commissioned by his wife and his sister to do that. Vieri Torrigiani also gave us the papyri and has planted 3 pomegranates by the tombs of our great poets, which are not in bloom now, but in the summer are just absolutely gorgeous. Okay. The winged globes, the winged hourglasses, the serpents, the Ouroboros, where the serpent is devouring its tail, are from the books published by Champollion Rossellini following their expedition to Egypt and Nubia. So you'll find a classical tomb, but with Egyptian motifs on them as well. The Victorian eclecticism, which is fascinating.